Everybody, the Simple Handicap for Wednesday, September 18th. Thank you for making me a part of your morning. As always, in each daily episodes, we'll go through every game, every team, every side, every total to get you caught up with everything you need to know when it comes to betting on the NFL. But before we jump into it, I want to remind you, if you want to have a little bit more detail on all of the games, the Wednesday preview live stream will go live today at 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on RAS Picks YouTube. If you're watching on YouTube, you can hit the subscribe button down below. If you're listening to this podcast episode on Apple or Spotify, you can jump over to the YouTube channel, join the live chat. Great communities building in the live chat every single week. Will be good to catch up with everybody as we go through in detail every game on the Week 3 card. So that, again, will go live 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. With all that said, let's get into it with the market rundown for this Wednesday morning. Week 3 kicks off tomorrow with the New England Patriots going on the road to take on the New York Jets. The Jets are hanging steady as a 6.5-point favorite across the board. Total in this game, 38.5. As mentioned yesterday, we released the Jets side at -6. That pushed this number up to 6.5. And I'm quite honestly a little bit surprised we haven't seen 7 yet. I think this number should get back to the look-ahead opener of 6. We had some numbers internally that made this higher than 7. Don't know if it ultimately will, just with the short total and some of these numbers being grabbed just based on the shorter totals, bigger point spreads, and maybe a little bit of doubt in what we've seen from the Jets against the Titans. Perhaps a little bit unfortunate or unlucky to get away with the win, undeserving, perhaps a better word, and then the Pats a little bit unlucky in the true sense of the word to lose at home in overtime. So that's perhaps a little bit of a box score dynamic that might keep this number down, but certainly would still lean to the Jets at this current price. We get into the Sunday games. It kicks off with the Chargers on the road at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Pittsburgh now a 1-point favorite across the board. Total continues to dip a little bit lower, 35.5, shaded to the under from left to right across the screen. Interesting to see this matchup and how it's going to really dictate what's being bet in the market now that the Justin Herbert news is clear. The game plan for the Pittsburgh Steelers going forward yesterday was confirmed by Mike Tomlin is going to be for a Justin Fields start, so it continues to be the Steelers pushing forward with Fields, presumably until he loses a game. I'm not too sure exactly what the thought process is behind the scenes, but you go through 2 games, scoring 1 touchdown, and you come out 2-0. Certainly a reflection of the defense for the Steelers, which the Chargers will be stepping up quite a bit in class to face after last week getting anything that they wanted against Carolina, and then a pretty favorable matchup against the Raiders on the ground, even with the Raiders maybe being a little bit more competitive in that game than the final scoreline would indicate. So I'll be curious to see how this gets bet the rest of the week. Chicago on the road at the Indianapolis Colts. Chicago money leaking into the market slowly. Certainly is going to be a situation where Caleb Williams and the Bears have more success than they've had on offense in weeks 1 and 2. Keenan Allen still an unknown. We'll get some practice reports. I wouldn't expect anything more than a limited participation today. Tomorrow, Thursday, the full practice is going to be the key day for Allen and whether or not he is going to be able to go. If he is, I think that success climbs even a little bit higher. I was looking at this number just total-wise. Have to think this creeps up a little bit more. We saw it touch 44 and come back down to 43.5, but this certainly starts to look like a bit of an over. I think about the Colts and the game they played against the Packers. That was Malik Willis and a Packers team running the ball at a ridiculous rate. What does that do to the overall total pricing for the Colts, bringing them down? You have DeForest Buckner now placed on IR. He's going to miss 4 games. You had Juju Brents go on IR, so that's the best corner and the best defensive lineman for the Colts not going to be participating in this game. So I think Chicago certainly pushing here. What kind of effort do we get from the Colts offense? I would expect them to go a lot more run heavy than what we've seen in weeks 1 and 2, as they've just been throwing it everywhere downfield with Richardson. Just shocked to see them go away from the run game, which maybe has not yet been unveiled, but certainly something I think they could have success with here against that Bears defensive front. And so if that's the case and you have a banged up defense going up against the Chicago offense that's been suppressed because they played very good Titans defense week 1, a very good Texans defense week 2, maybe a little bit surprised to see this total adjusted down as low as it has been. Houston on the road at the Minnesota Vikings. Houston a 2.5-point favorite across the board. Total holding steady at 46 in this game. As I mentioned yesterday, There was a release from a professional bettor on the Houston Texans at -2. This number has not crept up to touch a 3 yet since open back on Monday morning at circa. Minnesota money took it off, got down to as low as 1.5 before that release at 2, brought the 1.5s up and pushed this game up to 2.5. But it's been Minnesota money coming back in a bit of a resistance sense. It seems like the market has kind of flipped around to supporting Minnesota and viewing them as a team warranting this price point more so than we saw perhaps last week, where there was pro money on the Vikings that came in. They were still a sizable dog at home to San Francisco. They get the outright win. This feels like now on the other side of 3, it's flipped a little bit. I mean, look ahead here was 4.5. So there's certainly pro money supporting Minnesota again for a second week in a row after that release. Houston was being sold by the market last week as we saw pro money come in on Chicago. So you get that difference and this push to the other side of the key. Interesting to me that release that we saw in Houston this week didn't get it up to the flat 3. Thought it might have. The fact that it didn't kind of shows how strong the sentiment here is on the Minnesota Vikings. New York Giants on the road at the Cleveland Browns. Cleveland a 6-point favorite across the board. Total from 40.5 at open, now down to 38.5. Not a ton of opinions being shown in the market on this game. Really, the big news you have to watch for is the reinforcements potential to return for the Cleveland Browns on the offensive line. Keep an eye on Conklin today at practice. Keep an eye on Wills and see what we get from them. If this Browns team can get a full offensive line or even just one of those two guys back for the first time this season, that will go a long way to bolstering the run game. Will give Watson a little bit more protection against a good Giants front 4. And there should be plenty of opportunity for the Browns to take advantage of that Giants secondary. As for what you're going to get from Daniel Jones in the pocket against this Cleveland Browns front, that seems like a pretty big mismatch for the Giants as well. Philadelphia on the road at New Orleans, and this is a very interesting game and market to talk about now that it's widely opened and fully available. So it is very apparent just by looking at the look-ahead number to where we are now. This was Philly -3.5. It is now the Saints a soft -3-point favorite. The Eagles narrowly lose on Monday Night Football to the Atlanta Falcons. Last minute, the Falcons come back. And so it's seemingly a very large downgrade or upgrade for either of these two teams. Now, let's put some context to it. This is a game that, when you look at market ratings, has the Saints last week being 23rd in market ratings and this week being 8th. A 1-week jump to go from 23rd to 8th is enormous for market ratings in that context. Now, could certainly say that is a deserving bump for the Saints, who have scored nearly a record high points through 2 weeks, look completely dominant on offense. Let's stick with that. Okay, so this is a deserving upgrade for the Saints. Where this gets kind of interesting is we think about where the Eagles number closed against the Falcons. 5.5 was the closing number. The game was in Philadelphia. Let's be overly generous and say the Eagles, based on those numbers, were 3 points better on a neutral field, removing the home field advantage for Philadelphia. So the Eagles closed 3 points better than the Atlanta Falcons. When we look ahead to week 4, we have the Saints playing the common opponent of the Atlanta Falcons in a divisional game. We now have numbers for that game. Next week, based on the early look-ahead lines, we see that the Atlanta Falcons at home are 1.5 points better on the point spread than the New Orleans Saints. Hold on with me as we go through this. So we're going to take away home field for Atlanta. Let's call the Saints and Falcons equals at home. Well, where you start to be intrigued by this number here, and maybe it's to the point where the over-adjustment is happening. Maybe it's a week early for the Saints and we see it next week. I don't know. But as we're just kind of looking at this, we have the Eagles, who closed 3 points better based on a neutral field number against the Atlanta Falcons in a game that they had a 99% win probability late in the fourth quarter. Okay, so you're 3 points better than the Falcons here. And then the Saints and Falcons are effectively being priced equal in the market next week on the look-ahead lines. But in this game specifically, we have the Saints as a soft 3-point favorite hosting the Philadelphia Eagles. This number is certainly well shaded towards the Saints to a pretty extreme extent. Now, anytime we've seen this get to a 3, there's been Eagles money come back. This is another game that's going to be back and forth on the key numbers. You can potentially downgrade the Eagles for the short week. You could potentially downgrade the Eagles for not having A.J. Brown. I think both of those are fair. Bit of a reach to get to this number is how I kind of look at it at this time, but there are certainly negatives for the Eagles in this matchup. But what an upgrade and what a bump up as you're looking at about 15 spots increase for the Saints week over week. They're certainly getting all of the pricing input into them that they're warranting from some of these score lines that they're putting up. So very interesting price here, very interesting price next week. Let's see what happens with this number. But so far, it's been Saints money up to that 3, and then it's been Eagles money coming back the other way once you see the 3 on the screen. Denver on the road at the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Buccaneers 6.5-point favorites everywhere, except for BetOnline. They're showing 7. Heritage mirroring BetOnline this morning. They're at 7 as well. Total in this game, 43 at the open, down to 39.5. Denver, 2 very difficult defensive opponents in week 1 and 2 between going into Seattle as well as playing the Pittsburgh Steelers. Tampa Bay defensively banged up with multiple injuries. Keep an eye for Vita Vea. I would not expect him to be out there, but you're still looking at all of those injuries piling up in the secondary. This is a very short total. To me, I would be surprised if this total does not get bet up between now and the weekend. Green Bay on the road at the Tennessee Titans. It is Tennessee now a 3-point minus 105 favorite at Chris. We are seeing 3 even money at Buckeye, BetOnline, and a number of others. 2.5 minus 20 at Circa, 2.5 minus 20 at Pinnacle, and Heritage as well. That's now representing the 105 skin off of that, or 105 independent business. But for that line number over there is 2.5 minus 120 as well. Total 39.5 down to 36.5. Tennessee continues to take money. You start to wonder, like, how much did the Packers get out of Willis from that specific game plan? You would think employing that same game plan against this great duo of defensive tackles for Tennessee might be disadvantageous, and so there's money now coming in on the Titans. Lots of talk about DeAndre Hopkins being involved more than he has in the first 2 weeks. Head coach Brian Callahan saying they've got to find ways to get the ball to Hopkins, so we might see him a bigger part of this offense as well. But Titans continue to take money as the week goes on. Carolina on the road at the Las Vegas Raiders. No movement in this game yesterday. Still 41 on the total. Still 5.5 on the point spread with the news that Andy Dalton will be starting. Tough to ignore the fact that when Dalton played in his one game last year, he got the ball to Adam Thielen an absolute ton. 11 catches for Thielen in that game. So let's see some prop prices that come out later today over in Carolina with Dalton now starting under center and a new offensive regime in. Miami on the road at the Seattle Seahawks. Seattle now a 4.5-point favorite. This to me feels right. We talked about it the last couple days on the podcast. Those 6.5s were awfully large for Miami considering what that implied with Seattle closing -6 in week 1 against the Denver Broncos. 4.5 here feels like a much better number. Total still at 41 across the screen. Detroit on the road at the Arizona Cardinals. Lions still 2.5-point favorites across the board. This one's come all the way down from 4.5 on the look ahead, 3.5 on the reopen. It's been Arizona money one way all week. Total 51.5, now out to 52.5. We released 51 to the over earlier in the week. Baltimore on the road at the Dallas Cowboys. It is the Ravens, a 1-point favorite still. Left to right across the screen. Total in this game still 48.5. Touched 49 for a brief moment on Tuesday. It has now come back to the under. San Francisco on the road at the LA Rams. It's still 49ers as a 7.5-point favorite across the board. Total in this game is 43.5 and trending a little bit lower at a number of books. We're seeing Pinnacle shaded to the under. We're also seeing Heritage 105 shaded to the under. Jazz shaded to the under as well. We're seeing a flat 43 at Circa. This total was as high as 45.5 earlier in the week at Circa. Do we see a rebound? Do we see some buyback on the over? That's yet to be determined. As I'm looking at this matchup, some interesting comments from McVay talking about how they're not sure if they have enough guys or the right personnel to work out of 11 like they typically do at the league's highest rate. So it's probably going to be a formational change for the Rams with injuries to Kupp and Nakua. That's a bit of a curveball that they can throw at the 49ers, who are not going to have Deebo Samuel on the field. We're still watching today for the practice status of Nick Bosa. That's enormous from that defensive front. And then the Rams, Falcons, all eyes injury-wise are going to be on the offensive line and just trying to figure out how many guys are going to be out there. So a key report to watch later today. Sunday Night Football, it is the Chiefs on the road at the Atlanta Falcons. From 4.5, the Chiefs were on the look ahead to a flat 3, -120 this morning at Chris. Atlanta money came in as the Chiefs were laying 3.5. It's pro money now, twice, 2 games in a row for the Atlanta Falcons against top-tier opponents. Interesting to see the support that they continue to get in the market. 47, now down to 46.5 on the total. Monday night doubleheader, it's Jacksonville on the road at the Bills, and Jags money continues to come into the market. The Bills now a 5-point favorite. For the most part across the screen, we saw that move really come through and take out some 5.5s late yesterday evening, around 8:30 p.m. Eastern time. BetOnline was the first to go. Pinnacle followed. We saw Jazz and a few other books follow. We're still waiting for bigger moves at Chris and Circa this morning, but it's Jags money as we kind of anticipated the last 2 days coming in, as those 6.5s were awfully big numbers comparatively speaking to the Arizona Cardinals, who went in to Buffalo back on week 1. That was a bigger number. So we're now in a similar manner to what we're seeing Miami and Seattle get to. We're kind of seeing this number level out a little bit. And at this point, I would expect we probably get pretty close to seeing different opinions, especially so if we're getting widespread 4.5s. Washington on the road at the Cincinnati Bengals. It is 7.5. At Chris, 7.5 at Circa. Buckeye still holding steady with BetOnline and Pinnacle and 8. But this was a game that we saw get to 8 most places across the board. A little bit of buyback on Washington. Key news to watch for is T. Higgins. We heard from Zach Taylor trending in a positive direction. A little bit vague on what that ultimately means, but a guy that's obviously going to have a massive impact when he is able to return. Total from 47.5 out to as high as 48.5. Bengals looking to sign defensive linemen because they've got nobody left at the position. There's a severe lack of depth past Hendrickson, and they're looking to add on vets to that defensive line for reinforcements. A lot of holes in that Cincinnati defense at the moment. Big question is, can Washington take advantage of it? I've heard lots of pros so far that I look at and respect using Cincinnati in a teaser leg. Even with the higher total, it's a higher money line. You're getting down through the 7 and the 3. So the Bengals, likely one of the most popular teaser legs so far this season. That'll do it for me today on this Wednesday morning. Remember, live stream kicks off 12 p.m. Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific time. Hope to see each and every one of you over on the RAS Picks YouTube channel. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, and if you're already here, hit that subscribe button down below. It'd be great to have you for the live stream coming up in a couple of hours. Have a fantastic Wednesday, everybody. We'll see you on the live stream. And if not, we'll see you back here on the podcast feed tomorrow morning.